Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti. I am MrPhotographer.com. In this video, we're going to talk about dodging and burning in Lightroom. We're going to start out with an image that looks like this, do some dodging and burning, and end up with an image that looks like this. Most often you're going to dodge and burn an image to get some control over what is called the mental space. The mental space is how someone looks at and perceives your image. And believe it or not, you have a lot of control how someone looks at your image. You could brighten up parts of your image so that the person looking at it will notice that before they'll notice something that may be a little darker. Also, you could use dodging and burning in such a way to control how someone actually physically looks at the image. Do they look from the lower left-hand corner in towards the middle, or the upper right-hand corner in, or do they just go right to the middle? Believe it or not, you have a lot of control over how someone really looks at your image, and dodging and burning will really help with that. Now, what I recommend you do is do all your global processing first. In the case of this image, I did all the basic processing I wanted to do. Everything I wanted to do globally is done. Now I want to look at the image and decide for myself, how do I want someone to look at it? I'm controlling the mental space. Well, I want them to notice that waterfall, so I'm going to brighten up the waterfall. I also want them to notice the beautiful colors that are on the cliff walls, not only of the leaves, but of the walls themselves. What don't I want them to notice? Well, there really isn't a lot, but right in here, this kind of cement area here, that's not very attractive. It's actually like blacktop. The leaves are nice, but other than that, I don't want them to really dwell here. I'd rather they dwell over in here. So we're going to use dodging and burning to our advantage to accomplish that. Now, you most often will dodge and or burn with the brush or radial filter. And I have 3 examples today, and we're going to use both in all the examples. We're going to start out with the brush tool. I want to brighten up that waterfall. Now, I've noticed some YouTube teachers through the years teach dodging and burning in Lightroom, and some of them talk about moving flow down or density down. I don't like to do that. I'd rather just move exposure around and use individual brushes. What they're doing is if they have flow low, they could just do 4 brush strokes over here, let's say to dodge, and then 10 brush strokes over here to dodge. So this right side has more dodging done than it to this left side, and they both have the same exposure setting. That's fine. That works great. I'll just use individual brushes. It goes a little faster for me, and I have a little more control in my opinion. I'm going to bring exposure up in this case, and as far as auto mask is concerned, I'll use it when I need it, and I won't use it when I don't need it. In this case, I think I need it. I want to make sure that I'm only brightening the waterfall and not the cliff walls on either side, and we're going to brighten the waterfall everywhere, even this little sliver way up here. So auto mask will help with that. Now, you could affect the brush size with the center wheel on your mouse, or if you're like me and have an Apple Magic Mouse, just drag your finger on it. You also could use the bracket keys on your keyboard if you prefer. Left bracket key makes it smaller, right bracket key larger. And of course, you could just do this slider over here as well. So again, I will put exposure usually up around a stop. Give or take. I just kind of move it up towards a stop. Again, I'll have flow and density all the way up. I'll usually have feathering between 80 and 100. Depends on the situation. In this case, I'm going to keep it at 100. And I have auto mask on. And I'll come in and I'll brighten up this waterfall here. And I'm going to get a smaller brush and brighten up the white water down here. And then this little sliver of waterfall, I'll get a smaller brush, and with auto mask on, that will help make sure that I'm only brightening up the water. Now that's a little too bright, so I'll just come in and move exposure down. And I think that looks pretty good. So there's before, and there's after. Now, this cliff wall over here is kind of dark and drab, so I want to brighten that up, and I think I'm going to use a radial filter for that. So we'll get the radial filter tool, and I want to turn exposure up and invert it so that the center of the radial filter is getting the adjustment. And I'll just draw out like that, brighten it up, move it over that way a little bit, maybe move it this way a little bit, maybe down a little bit. Now, one advantage you have when you're doing dodging and burning in Lightroom with either the brush or the radial filter is you're not just limited to exposure. You could move any slider you feel is needed. In this case, I want to, as I mentioned at the beginning, bring out some of the color, not only of the leaves, but of the cliff wall. The cliff walls were very colorful. So I'll turn saturation up. So we make that a little more colorful. Now, so far so good, but right in here, a little dark. It's really dark in here. So I'm going to get a new radial filter. I'll click on new. When I click on new, it brings the saturation down to 0. That's what I want. And I'm going to just bring out a radial filter like this, move it down a little bit, brighten it up there, maybe add a little bit of contrast, just a little bit, giving a little more detail in there. It was so dark you couldn't see any detail. And we'll see with saturation up. There wasn't really much color there though, so we'll leave saturation down. I think that's fine. Now I mentioned right here, I really don't want people to look right here. So we're going to darken that or burn that. We'll get another new radial filter. This one, we're going to take exposure down. We are going to keep it inverted, and we'll draw this one out. Now, what I often do is I'll go to 1:8 mode to make this smaller when I'm working with radial filters. That way, I could drag the filter off the image like that. Now, in this case, I don't want it affecting up here, but you'll notice if I take either end, it moves the opposite end equally. And if you watch any of my videos, you'll know there's a little trick to get around this. That is, hold the Alt or Option key, Alt if you have a PC option, if you have a Mac, and then you could move one end all by itself. And then we're going to move this end like that. And maybe move it over just a little more. Maybe like that. Maybe draw that out like that. So we're making this just a little darker. And I think that looks good. We'll go back to Fit. And let's do a before and after the radial filters. There's before the radial filters, after the radial filters. So you can see how just that subtle adjustment of those 3 radial filters, it takes the emphasis off this and puts the emphasis more over here and a little bit up there. But that's what I want. And I think maybe what I'll do then is kind of as a lead in towards the waterfall, this area here. So we're going to get a new radial filter here, and we're going to brighten this one up. And we'll come in like this and rotate it a little and maybe bring it out like that, maybe up like that. That looks pretty good. And in this case, I will bring saturation up on that. So there's before the radial filters and after the radial filters. Before and after. And you add that along with the brush stroke of the waterfall, and we've actually done quite a bit to control the mental space of someone looking at this image. Now I have another image. We'll jump over to it. This next image is, believe it or not, an image that I did not do anything to color. Nothing. Let's show you the basic tab. You can see vibrance and saturation are both at 0. We'll go to the HSL tab, and you can see hue, saturation, and luminance are all zeroed out. This was the actual color that morning. This is that great, golden hour. This was probably 5:30 in the morning at Virginia Beach, and that is the beautiful colors of the sun. Now, it's a rather mundane photo, but I picked it because it's got some natural lines in the image. That is just the way the beach is kind of manicured, I guess, and these tracks. And what I often do is I take any natural lines that are in the image and I do dodging and burning on top of them to help make them even stronger, more of a visual clue or visual cue to the viewer to look through the image. So whenever you have a strong diagonal line, that's a real strong visual cue to help lead the viewer through the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the brush tool, and we're going to start out with some dodging. And really what I'll do is I'll just make the darker parts darker and the lighter parts a little lighter. So in this case, I'm going to take Auto Mask off, and I have exposure down about a stop. And I'll just come in here, and now this is way too dark, right? I mean, ridiculous, but that's why I just use like separate brushes. Now I'll just pull this way down, like just a little bit. You want it very subtle, and really a lot of times your eyes will be fatigued, and it may look good to you right now, but I suggest you walk away from your computer, come back a half hour later, or maybe a day later, and then you'll see that it doesn't look right, and you'll have to tone everything down. So that is that. Now there's before, and there's after. You can see it's really subtle. Now we're going to come in here, and we're going to get a new one. That's why I use different brushes for all these examples. That way I don't have to mess with flow or density. So this one's coming like this, kind of like that, and we'll take this and readjust that to more towards 0, kind of like that maybe. Then I'll do is I'll get a new brush now, and now I will kind of burn around it. That's kind of what I found works pretty good. So we have these darker areas, so what I'll come in is I'll lighten up like the areas nearby. And I think I could use one brush for all of this. Like that. And maybe not quite that much, just a little less. And if you see, like I maybe went over a little bit here, so I could erase it by hitting the, holding in the Alt or Option key. It's Alt if you have PC, Option if you have Mac. And I could kind of take away the brush stroke around there, wherever I might have went a little bit too far with it. So there is before, and there's after. So it's still like a little bit too strong, and a little trick you could do, especially now if I walked away and I came back to this and said, wow, it's a little bit too strong. Instead of going in and moving individual adjustments for each and every brush stroke I've done, what you can do is this little triangle right here. Click on that, and you'll collapse everything down to an amount slider. Then what you could do is you could just lessen things up a little bit like that. And then we could do before, after. There's before, and there's after. And so you get the idea. You come through, and just anywhere that you think, get a new one, that you'd like to bring the viewer's attention in. Usually you would either dodge it or burn it. It doesn't matter. In this case, it's going to be from this corner here, and I'm going to make it a little brighter. Like this. Like that. Now this one, I'm going to undo that by hitting Command Z twice to remove those brush strokes. On this one, I think Auto Mask might work better. So we'll come in like that. Brighten that up there. Then I'll get a new brush and bring exposure down just a little bit. And I think we'll do Auto Mask still on this, and we'll come in like, and this one we're going to lessen that, as not as strong, just a little bit. Now, by all means, if you feel like you're not getting the right adjustment doing it the way I do it, you feel free to turn flow down and do it in that manner. That does work fine. It's just I tend to think my way just goes a little faster. So there's before dodging and burning and after dodging and burning. You can see it just helps lead the people through the scene. Now, in this case here, it's still a really mundane scene. It's not something I probably would try to print or anything like that, but I thought it was a good example to show you how I use lines that are already in the image and accentuate those to help control the mental space of the person looking at it. All right, let's do another one. I have another technique I want to show you. This here, the main thing here is we want people to notice the band. We want them to notice the guys. And we don't really necessarily need them to look at that door or the steps. So you could use a vignette. All a vignette is burning of the edges. And back, those of you that are as old as me and worked in a darkroom know that we would do dodging and burning on a print, and we would often burn the outside edges of the image make them less noticeable and help push everyone's attention more towards the middle. But I don't want to use the actual vignette that is in the effects tab. I want to do it more locally, and I'm going to do it with the radial filter to begin with. So we'll get the radial filter, and I don't want to invert this. I'm going to have exposure down, so it's going to affect outside of the actual radial filter, and I'm just going to draw it out like this at first. Then what I want to do is just fit it so it's around them, but not like touching them, I guess. But to do that very quickly and easily is hold the Command or Control key, and it's Command if you have a Mac, Control if you have a PC, and with that held in, just double click anywhere inside of the radial filter. And when you do that, you'll automatically resize it so it's just touching the four ends. Now, as you can see, I could bring down the exposure. And you could affect feathering as well if you think it's feathered too much. In this case, I'm going to leave it up. Now, once it's there, it kind of almost looks like there's a spotlight on them, and some of the spotlight's spilling on the back of the walls here where the door is. So I want to burn that as well. So I want to burn the doors back here more evenly so there isn't brightness there. And I even could burn some of the stairs on the sides. So what you could do now with this radial filter active, there's a brush tool inside of it where you're going to affect the mask. See, it says mask, then it says new edit brush. Just click on brush. And what it will do is it becomes the brush tool essentially, but it's going to just affect the radial filter. Now I want auto mask clicked on, and exposure's preset to match the radial filter adjustment. So what I'll do now is I'm going to leave auto mask on, so I'm just affecting the actual doors and not necessarily their clothes or their hair. And you can see now I'm burning all that darker. So it doesn't look like as much that a spotlight is hitting them. And that's the way I characterize it. There like that. Now the stairs over here, again with auto mask on, we can come in here and darken those as well. And over in here. You can see with auto mask on, it's not touching them really. It's just doing where I'm clicking. Even his, like, no, that looks a little bright down there, so I could as well. Yeah, maybe a little more in there. But you get the idea. And what you could do then is you could hover over the little button in the middle, and wherever is red is where the radial mask is affecting. That includes the areas I hand painted in with the brush. So when you're done with that, you could go back to edit, and you're back to the radial filter now. And you could, change exposure if you want. But let's see, there's before and there's after. So you can see how the dodging and burning put more of an emphasis on them and less of an emphasis on the steps and the door behind them. So again, I just want to reiterate, when you go in and you're going to dodge and burn something, just don't do it willy-nilly, like, make one area brighter, another area darker. Generally speaking, you want to use it in such a way that you're controlling how someone's going to look at the image. So you want them to look at a specific thing. In the first example, I had them look at that waterfall, and I wanted them to notice that. So we're going to go with the brighter, dodging on the waterfall itself to make that brighter. And then dodging on areas I want them to notice. It was a little dark over here, so I brightened it up. It was a little dark over here, I brightened it up. It was a little bright here, and I didn't want them to notice that, so I darkened it down. So you could see, again, there's before and after. And of course, we did brush strokes on this one as well. So there's before. And if I go back to the radial filter, there's before. So there's before we did any adjustments at all. And then, of course, I added that brush. And then I added that several radial filters. Now, the second one I don't consider actually a good image. Again, I just wanted to use that to demonstrate how I often will take lines that are already in a shot and accentuate those with dodging and burning to help bring those out a little more. And the third image, I used to demonstrate how you could use the brush inside of the radial filter to contribute to your dodging and or burning. In this case, it was burning. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.